Welcome, Phil. Great to have
Hi,
you here at Startup Grind.
it's awesome to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
As a start, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Okay, hi, my name is Phil Ingram. I'm the founder of Meed, which is a cloud computed loyalty platform. I'm based here in Hong Kong. I've been here, in fact, it'll be 30 years later this month. I came here with hair. Originally from London. I've been here all that time, with the exception of 3 years at the turn of the century when I lived in New York for the dot-com boom and bust. My company, Meed, is effectively a cloud computed loyalty platform. We're a little different because our aim is to turn a very supply driven, siloed, fragmented customer experience into a demand driven marketplace, so that, you know, if you're a consumer, you join something once, you join 50, it's all in one place. So I'm here. We have, since we started the company 2 years ago, we have started moving more and more into extensively using AI. So hopefully something in that experience will be of interest to the guys on the event.
Yeah, and we had not only did we meet in January, but we also had a very interesting call a few weeks back, and we talked about the topics, opportunities of AI, especially for creating new products and features fast. So that's the foundation for this event.
Yeah, although I should point out that since then everything has changed, and in a few weeks everything will probably change again. I think this is going to be possibly the least evergreen conversation you have because of the subject matter.
Yeah, but then let's start with some of sort of the foundations of the product. I mean, when we spoke, you mentioned that product managers are more relevant than ever because AI gives them additional power. So let's cover the basics. What exactly is the product manager's role, and what kind of documents or plans do they typically create, and what is their value?
Okay, it's a really, really good question. The traditional lean startup thinking is you'd not have a product manager, not in the early stages. This is a very sort of Series A type thing. You know, you want a small team of people being scrappy, breaking things, iterating. But I do think AI has changed that, not entirely, particularly as you go to a commercial product, but it has, at this stage, it has changed that. I would widen the product manager nomenclature and maybe sort of say product designer as well. Someone who can design UI, UX, document functionality in whatever format, expected inputs, conditions, outputs. If you can write all that down in a very clear, logical, sense-making way, basically so as if a human could understand it on the first pass, then you have a chance that a coding tool like Cursor or Replit would actually make sense of it and not pump out entire garbage. So I think what that means is that people who can design and conceive of a product can now actually do a lot more than they might otherwise do in a startup where really it's, you know, you're either building or selling. In my case, my head of product, David, he writes all the documentation, the combination of Google Docs, Miro, Figma, etc. whenever we do a new piece of functionality. And then that is sent to the coders. Interestingly, for Mead, we are a commercial product. We have real customers, real customer data, personal data. So only coders actually use that documentation to create code, but they are able to move a lot faster because of the work that David does. On a side note, something I want to experiment with, I've been looking at the Amazon method, the PR FAQs, which is where they start with the announcement of a new feature and work backwards. And that's something we're going to experiment with to see how vibe coding deals with that. Anyone on this call has ever tried anything like that, I'd love them to reach out to me.
Well, it's a really good point because, as you said, the product documentation is written in plain English, and what do we need to give to the AI? Well, plain English. So it's a really good point because that documentation becomes very, very valuable. And when we spoke about this, you kind of also said how AI can amplify the work of the product manager, especially in developments. Can you give us some more thoughts in regards to that?
I think, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. Just conceiving ideas, game playing ideas. Say, for example, you want to add a piece of functionality. You can talk to any of the basic chatbots, Gemini, ChatGPT, DeepSeek, whatever, and game it out. It might think of things you haven't thought of. I do that myself. Obviously, I'm very involved in my own product. I actually now I'm primarily using a Gemini gem since they added memory across threads. So I'll bash out how individual features might work. David, I know, uses GPT. So you can research, encapsulated functionality that you want to build. AI can map out entry and exit points, user flows. And then, of course, you can get it to write the PRD for you. Interesting point. I came across literally, I think it was yesterday, a website called chatprd.com, which I found a product requirements document. It's probably a wrapper, but there's something I want to have a look at. Caveat, you need to read everything that it makes. You can't go entirely hands off, not even for a second. A little snafu early on is going to cascade into something really bad later, but it can supercharge you. I think a human has to make the final call, but you can really get a volume of work, research, understanding, and tabulating done that previously, obviously, you wouldn't have been able to do before.
Yeah.
Oh, and UI tools. Sorry, one other thing I thought of, things like UI tools. Wireframe Designer for Figma is something that we use quite extensively as well. That helps save a lot of time.
Yeah, and I learned some 6-8 months ago about Mermaid, which is kind of a language to describe the flow, and ChatGPT nicely creates that. Yeah, but your point about we have to read everything the AI writes to make sure that there's nothing slipping into that. So could you also share maybe some points where the strong product thinking using a solid PRD have saved you money and time and during development with AI?
Well, it does all the time now. There are some things you can't. The structure of Meed is we have a cloud computed platform, which is of various front ends talked to by API. There are some things we simply will not use AI for. Anything that involves directly talking to the back end, we won't, because of security risks and the risk of missing a weak point that might be produced. But all our front end work now, all the templating work, etc., is we primarily use Cursor. The first time we really experienced just how much of a difference it could make, we started working on what we call V2 of our platform. V1, basically, having put it out in the market, had customers, we realized that if we knew then what we knew now, we'd probably structure it differently. And we wanted to break functionality apart and make it little tidbits of functionality rather than this sort of complex pages with everything on. The first thing you often do when you're building something new is you build the login shell so you can attach things to inside or outside of that shell. We did in half a morning and an afternoon to create an entire new login shell with all the single sign-on logins, everything. And we did something. Basically, I'd say it reduced about 80% of the time. And obviously, writing code, your only real expense is a bit of electricity and the time of the coders. So taking 80% off the time bill is pretty significant. As you go deeper into a product, time, you may not save as much time because you're looking for far more connection points, many more opportunities for things to go astray. But yeah, I mean, firsthand, it has saved a huge amount of time. The very first time we used it, we said our estimate was it was a fifth the time to do.
And it also gives opportunities to make different variations of the same product because time permits it.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Now, then we're going to move into the next one, of course, which is sort of the biggest myths about AI generated code and sort of how to avoid surprises. So from your perspective, what are the most common misconceptions people have about AI to write code, and how do you address it when asked?
Well, I think this answer will count for almost AI to do anything, but specifically with code, I think the primary misconception is it is at this stage a replacement for human programmers. I think a lot of people think you can tell an AI what you want, press a button, and voila, you have sort of perfect bug-free application, which is not true. In reality, for me, I think you need to treat AI as a tool, just like a compiler or an IDE. Yes, it can automate repetitive tasks, generate boilerplate code, maybe suggest solutions to complex problems. but I think it still requires a skilled programmer to guide it, to integrate that code into the wider platform and make sure that it meets the requirements you set for it. I would think of it like this: AI can help you build individual bricks, and that's where it's most powerful. Don't build the whole thing, build a brick, and then you still need an architect to design the building, and you still need a construction crew to put it together. AI is really good at making the components. At least that was my viewpoint at the moment. I think obviously every week we see more and more capability, and as we move into sort of agentic coders rather than request coding, then I think maybe that will change. But I always have a concern about things like security. If you have a product that has consumer data, one of these days you're going to meet something like GDPR, and GDPR requires you to know your data flows. And if you vibe coded everything and you don't really understand your data flows, then you're technically not in compliance. So for me, the biggest myth is it's a complete replacement. It's not. It's a powerful tool, but it's not a replacement.
Yeah, and you mentioned autocomplete, like some people say, oh, it's like autocomplete on steroids, and but it's there where we are today. And of course, the development with new tools and acquisitions, things makes. Now, you mentioned there about the modules. So when you and I spoke a few weeks back, you talked about the mise en place, French word, in coding. So for the audience, what does it mean, and why does it matter so much when building with AI?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me this question, so because it's in the agenda, and so I thought about this some more. But mise en place popped into my head as we started doing more vibe coding. One of my other things is I love to cook, and I am very much a practitioner of mise en place, which means effectively I pre-prepare everything before I get to the pan. If to describe what that means, I think I sort of did some work and I broke this down into sort of 5 points. I'm going to do a LinkedIn post on this later in the week. First of all, you need to define the ingredients or the requirements. You need to prepare all the tools, your development environment, for example, organize the workplace, your architecture, prepare precise instructions. You cannot assume if you miss something out that it'll pick it up. And then basically taste and adjust, testing and refinement. But effectively, that boils down to get all of your ducks in a row, and then bit by bit, build the application up. Don't let the AI, whether you're using Cursor, Replit, Bolt, whatever, don't let them guess or assume. The more you specifically point out and have thought through what you want it to do, the more likely you're going to have success. That is what I mean by mise en place for AI development.
Yeah, and it turns into bite-sized. So, and one thing that you sort of connected with this, when you have your team and you have the AI building all of these different sort of blocks, etc., how do you keep them aligned on building all the features?
There's a number of ways. In terms of, part of that is a communication thing. Obviously, we have a workflow. We have documentation which is created, which then goes to coders. We have specific members of the technical team who work on specific things. Paul handles the front end. Nishi handles the back end. Sandeep handles the cloud. And between Sandeep and Nishi, they do the APIs. So people have very specific roles and control very specific parts of the platform. So structure, people knowing what parts they're responsible for, good communication, and a workflow that goes from product ideation through documentation into actual coding. And wrapped around that, our core sort of documentation tool is Notion. I'm a big Notion proponent. So all our engineering, sprints, CRM, feature list, knowledge base, which are all interlinked. We use Notion, so that's where everybody goes to know exactly what's going on any point of the product. And our primary tool is Cursor, which we use the Teams version connected to our GitHub. So everyone has visibility of what's going on there.
And then, of course, as you mentioned, the original PRD documents are going to be useful again when it comes to testing. So it ties it nicely together. Now, AI can seem to accomplish a lot for us, but also you already mentioned about the human oversight. So how do you balance the automation with human insight? How do you sort of get the time for the humans to also look at what the AI does, and vice versa? And
I think
sort of, yeah, go on.
I think mainly it's about again it's about communication. We're a very, very small team. Now, my answer to my question might be different if I was a very, very big team. But if you're talking about startups where you maybe got 1, 2, 3 people coding, then the most powerful way to stay in touch is basically to all be sitting next to each other. I think, it's very much a human thing. Not that many people, everyone has access to the same code base in GitHub. Everyone's communicating and document what they do in whatever tools you use. In our case, it's Notion. I think the human, that's actually my answer, I suppose, is that the human element is what enables you to keep control over the automated element.
Yeah, and then when it comes to, as you said, your product, the V1 product out there, you have clients, and you are just running it now at a food festival in Hong Kong. So we also talked a little bit about the marketing side, like AI doesn't replace marketing, it superpowers them. So what does that mean in practice at Meed?
Well, I'd say probably the same thing I'd say about the coding. AI doesn't replace marketers, but it sure as hell can supercharge them. We use AI to analyze customer data. We use AI to do competitive analysis. One of the greatest gifts from the major chatbots was deep research. That can be incredibly powerful, particularly if you develop some really strong prompting and really train the AI to do what you want. We extensively use bots. We were using Poe a lot. We're now using Gemini's gems so that we can do a lot of pre-training before we send them out to do things. You can automate the creation and distribution of social media content. Obviously this means a marketer can manage, more stuff at the same time. We use AI to generate various ad copy options, A/B testing, trying to identify effective messaging. We do role play with we've created our sort of customer profiles and our ICP and ideal customer profiles, and we do a lot of sort of role playing with AI. You are a restaurant owner, etc., and we sort of ask some questions. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. Obviously, the basic stuff, content idea generation, development, etc. I'll say one thing personally, anyone who goes and looks at Meed's digital footprint will see a lot of written words. That's me. I'm the writer in the company. And I do use AI for ideation and to structure content. But every final word that's written in a blog post, a press release, or a LinkedIn post, that's me. I type that. I refuse to let AI create content in my voice. I will let it give me structure and ideas, but I have to write it myself.
No, and because it makes it more interesting to read, because still we can kind of get a feeling where the AI is or where the human is. But it's also in that respect sort of good to also look at some sort of, where have you seen around you examples where AI generated content kind of missed its mark, and sort of what could they have done to prevent that?
I think people just get lazy. I think these days, if you want an example of where AI content has run amok, just look at LinkedIn. We've in the past couple of years, we've had this sort of explosion of people. I'm going to make my personal brand. And there's just a lot of lazy people putting out AI generated stuff. And for anyone who's barely literate, you can tell. I will say the one thing that does really annoy me, I have used the M dash, which is the very longest dash that touches the 2 letters either side, for 20 years. And now AI uses that all the time. So I've had to stop using it because people think AI created the content. But I think there's so many examples. You tell a blog post and you can tell. You read a LinkedIn post and you can tell. At the end of the day, you can train an AI to really understand your tone, but I just don't yet. Probably coming very soon, but yet I'm 99% sure I can guess each time I look at one whether it was done by AI or not.
And I always like it to kind of proofread whatever I want to write, so the structure's there.
It's a very good practice. Even if you use AI to create the article, please actually read it first to make sure it's what you really want to say.
Yeah, and vice versa. When I write something and it proofreads for me, so I know, oh, okay, that's the words come in a good order. But yeah, and of course, editing, trimming, not to which saves us time and which also leads us to the sort of the next question about how, because I know you built the entire company, it's bootstrapped and used AI without compromising quality. So what is one big lesson you would share to founders trying to move fast with AI, bootstrapping all the way? What's your biggest advice?
I'm not sure if this answer will surprise or not, but it doesn't matter whether you build with a team of people or you use AI. It doesn't matter how you do it. How you do it's actually how you do it just basically is good use of resources. It all still comes back to me for actually having identified a problem that you can identify a reasonable number of people have. And I think everything flows from that. There's no point in asking AI to do deep research on something unless you've got a real driving reason why you want to research that. It has to link back to that original spark. Unless you've used AI to come up with 20 business ideas that you could run as side hustles, and then maybe there's some promise. But I think for me, these are all tools. QuickBooks made it fast to do your accounting rather than handwriting into a ledger book. AI enables you to do a lot of tasks a lot faster than you could otherwise have done, and will help you ideate and think of things that you might not otherwise have thought of. But at the end of the day, the AI can't replace you, at least not yet. And I think so, use these tools, but use these tools in furtherance of a well thought through goal that has, an objective that has purpose. I don't know if that's the answer you're expecting, but I think all tools work better when you have a real purpose for using them.
No, and all tools, QuickBooks, etc., they all save time. Imagining if we would still need to do the accounting the way we're doing it now, at the same time as when you develop something, and you should definitely go out there and talk to people, or at least try to get some feedback. Maybe the AI can help to write some of those questions that you should go and ask, because without feedback, it's hard to know if you're on the right track. So it does help a lot. Now, during this conversation, you mentioned a number of different tools using Cursor and Gemini and Gem, etc. How do you keep yourself updated on all of these tools? What's going on, etc.? What sources do you follow?
That's an interesting. I try not to try too hard. I suppose my primary social media is the primary one. LinkedIn, X. I follow some accounts, although if you ask my age brain, I can't think of that many handles off the top of my head. I get newsletters like Hacker Noon, etc. I really don't try too hard. It is impossible to know everything, but if there's enough buzz around a tool, then eventually it's going to cross one of your feeds. There are some dedicated AI newsletters, but I tried some of those and they'll just read like 50 tools that launched this week, and I'm not going to click all 50 links. So I think, quite often what I'll do occasionally is I will do a search. I do prefer to pull rather than push, push rather than be pulled. So if I'm thinking I'll do a search, the latest tools for content generation or content ideation, or right now I'm really interested, for example, in agents. So I've been researching platforms that are enabling you to create agents. But the actual answer to your question, most of my knowledge or updates probably come from LinkedIn and X.
And being very good at the second best tool, whatever that is, probably makes you better than using the first best tool that, and without really knowing how it works. So maybe if sort of investing the time to learn the tool properly makes you better producing.
I'd like to comment on that. That is actually a really, really important point. There are so many tools. There are so many places you can spend $9.99 a month. You don't need them all. You just don't. They all have different. I see these posts in X about I do this in V0, then I move it to Bolt, and then I move it to Cursor. No. I mean, you only really need one, in my opinion, and use it well, document and do it properly. I personally, I don't. I mean, people may disagree with me, but I've not seen the benefit in having this sort of tool to tool to tool. And to be honest, right now, the vast majority of stuff, if you use GPT, obviously GPTs are a very powerful tool. I don't bother with GPT. It's a pain in the ass with all the VPNs and everything. I primarily use Gemini now it's available here. You can get a lot done with that, particularly now that you can create programmed agents and with threaded memory. So don't get carried away.
No, and the grass always looks greener across the hedge, even though it's.
Oh, here's another tool that's going to save my work, save my life. No, it doesn't work like that. Yeah. And any tool can take a long time to truly get to grips with. It's the 80-20 rule. The 20% that you really want to use is going to take 80% of your effort to actually get out of it.
Very good points. Phil, it's been amazing to have you here at Startup Grind. Thank you so much for being a guest with us today.
That was quick.
No, we're not over yet. We're getting there. We're soon moving to the Q&A. If people wants to keep in touch with you, how do they best do that?
Well, what I will do is I will just type my LinkedIn here, which I'm very good. I can actually linkedin.com/in/Phil Ingram. So that's probably the easiest way. Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. That's just the easiest way.
Yeah, and we're going to send out a follow-up email to everybody who's here so that you get Phil's contact details as well as sort of how to get to Meed. Phil, once again, it's been amazing learning from you today. You know, you're doing it, and it's really great to see it.
Sometimes by the seat of my pants. It's but it's exciting. You know, when you're trying to get stuff done, I've got to get this feature, I've got to get this piece of work done, this piece of work done. The fact that you can accelerate, you know, if you do it right. We've had moments where we've done it very wrong and we've lost time. It's not perfect, but it is really nice when you feel the team, because there's nothing as good for a team as it just moving forward. Momentum is the greatest thing any startup or any business can have. AI can, if used wisely, impart more momentum, although it cannot do it alone. So yes, it's cool, but we're still learning. I do not know everything.
No, and and that's why we're here today, because that is all Startup Grind is about, learning. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take Marin and promote as a presenter so that we can get. And I also know that we have some other Startup Grind people in the call.
Well, thank you so much. Well, I'll start with maybe with Larry's question, who was the first one to fire. I think there was one related to kind of vibe coding and the security around it, because as Larry pointed out, he recently used vibe code to develop a web app on Vault, and then he says that as soon as I finished, it left me to feel vulnerable and scared to take it to production. And then he's wondering if this is kind of a normal outcome for vibe coders, or is he maybe unjustified to be this paranoid, or basically how secure is vibe code from your experience?
That's a really fantastic question, and actually I see Larry asked a second question, and they're both tied together about how secure vibe coding is. I appreciate the fact that it worries you, because it's, you know, if you're building something that people will use, that means you will have their data, and having people's data in the palm of your hands comes with significant consequences. Now, as a little startup, you know, if you're doing an MVP, maybe you have an idea, you want to see if you get some angel or seed money to turn it into a product. This is where I go into CE mode rather than CEO mode rather than CTO mode. There are obviously a lot of these things about these. I think Vercel is a common. There's very sort of ready-made database platforms that these things plug into, and I think in the main they're generally safe. There are things that you could do. For example, you could take the application, assuming if you're connecting into some sort of GitHub account or whatever, which is a good thing to do. You know, you could always then give something separate, even something like Gemini, you know, or GPT, access to the code base and say, tell me, you know, point out, you know, security worries, etc. Little tip: pitching different AIs against each other can produce very interesting results. You can even make it a competition. Hey, GPT did this. Gemini, tell me what's wrong with it. And it will. So it is good to be concerned, because anyone who builds something that might handle someone's data, that is the natural state of being. If you're not concerned, then that would be a worry. But, you know, unless you're handling things like people's credit card information, just use Stripe so you don't have to, then there's not that much damage you can do. And you can use AI to check other AI's work to see how it, you know, basically see if you can find bugs.
And then just to finish off on his question, if you wanted to make changes to that code, have you found that it's reasonably easy, or had difficulties changing the code?
When I've done, although I don't write any code in Meed itself, although I am a coder, got my Zen PHP certification about 20 years ago. I've been doing this a while. I do write demos for the team to basically, show them my ideas, which I might just shove up onto a web page in JavaScript and React or whatever. Again, it's breaking up into bite-sized pieces. I've had times when I've used Cursor and I've tried to edit things and then it's changed something else. The ability for AIs to delete stuff that had nothing to do with the question you asked is legendary. The answer to that is you give it extremely explicit instructions on which code to touch and which not. And you obviously always have the ability to roll back. And maybe you could run the same query 3 times in a row and get 3 completely different results. You know, vibe coding is a very weird thing. As someone who actually can manually type code, it just makes me, it gives me the ick. It really does. So it's a completely different thing. So you got your base, if you got something that works, you got a particular thing that doesn't, try and fix it. If that doesn't do it, roll it back, change your instructions and make them more explicit. I mean, that's probably that's the advice I've seen. That's how I've tackled it. You know, there's probably, you could Google resources on that, and there's probably more, but that would be my first attempt at an answer.
Perfect.
And I think also,
yeah, I would like to go for it, Jens.
No, I was just the way that the good logic is to keep each part short. So, and then the relationships with each part of the code. So that makes it easier also to do this, and it doesn't overwrite. Yeah, go ahead, Marin.
But I just wanted to round off what Jens said, because that's actually really, really important. If you have a basic understanding of how LLMs work, you know, one of the metrics that they'll measure them by is basically, you know, the amount of stuff they can conceive in one moment of time. They don't have human-like memory where they can, at a moment of inflection, pick the right neurons and pull that memory out. They have what's in front of them at the time. The more you try to get them to do at the same time, the more they'll hallucinate. So yes, it is very important. One little bit at a time. You'll actually get, it's the tortoise versus the hare. You will get there much faster if you just a little bit at a time.
Perfect. And then Vidya was asking, going back to you mentioning that Cursor developed, increased the speed of development by 80%. In terms of cost, is that translated into a linear saving on cost by 80%, or how have you seen that translate into dollar amounts?
That is a sneakily sophisticated question. We're a small team, 7 people, bootstrapped a pretty complex cloud-based platform to market with people who actually pay me. And you know, we could only continue to do that at this stage because of AI. So yes, for me, I have depreciation on things like, if you want to get really accounting, I have depreciation on things like computers, which basically I write them off. It's the easiest way. You got power, a little bit of power, and maybe some software licenses, but the biggest bulk of cost is salaries. Coders need pizza to eat, and for that they need salaries to buy said pizza. So so if you save 80% of your time from an accounting point of view, you have near as damn it saved 80%, maybe 79.5. But yes, maybe that changes as teams grow more complex and you have new additional layers, and it's just not simply code commit. But for a smaller startup, then yeah, time is money.
Perfect. And you being at an interesting time where you do have a working product that clearly fits the market need. What tools have you seen that are useful for customer development and actually like reaching out to those customers, other than maybe content creation, which naturally will drag in a following?
Okay, so that's actually interesting. So basically we talked about making product coding, and we've talked about getting customers and marketing, but now you're getting into things like supporting customers and stuff like that, and that's really interesting. This is actually an area where I'm doing a lot of research now. I'm very interested in creating agents. I have as a commercial product in market, rather than someone posting stuff on X or someone building an MVP to impress investors. I am extraordinarily cautious. I have a lot of real private customer data from consumers who've joined programs on Mead. So I run, similar to Larry's, I'm in a constant state of fear of taking a wrong step and having a weak point where that data can be accessed. We actually have a pretty strong platform. There's no open windows. Most burglars just walk on by. So I am concerned about that. But I am interested in looking at agents, particularly with things like repetitive tasks, but not just telling you, but executing them. And I'm very interested in agents for one of the things we want to do with Mead. Mead has a typical SaaS form interface. It shows you form fields, you enter information, you hit submit. Of course, I'm very interested in moving to an agentic interface. If anyone's looked at our company, they'll see the frog. Well, actually, it's over there of my shoulder. If they're really observant, they might see that the frog actually spells MEED, the name of the company. But the frog has a name, and the frog's name is Sprig. And Sprig will be the agent that you talk to. So what I want is, normally, say, a restaurant, they'll have a freelance or a small marketing agency that handles this sort of stuff for them. I want them to be able to talk to Mead and Sprig as if they're talking to a freelancer. So I want to move into agents, both for onboarding, managing, and customer service inquiries. I see huge potential there. I'm wary about anything that touches an API with our platform, but I am very much looking at that. The two services that we're spending a lot of time with N8N, for automation. And there's one I came across just recently that basically they say create your entire AI workforce, and that's something called relevance.ai, which I literally came across the other day, and I've heard some people talk about that I'm going to explore. So yeah, I'm very into what can I use agents for, because everything I can use an agent for rather than a human means I can get to break even, because I'm a money making company, faster than I otherwise would have. My motivation, I don't really care about AI. It's fun. I don't care. I care about my customers being happy and well looked after and building a profitable company. Everything else is in service to that.
Right. It's important to maintain the focus on what actually matters and feeds your employees and yourself.
Yes. That pizza. If I run out of that pizza, I'm dead.
Here we have Anders asking if you use AI for customer research, or, for example, for validating the need for new features.
Yeah, I did actually touch on this earlier, but it's a really good question. Yes, I absolutely do, in a number of ways. I've used the deep search. I've used the deep search deep research capabilities of Grok. I do have a thing about Grok. Grok's cheeky. It suits my sense of humor. And although Grok, I have a plus account on Twitter. Grok doesn't have cross-thread memory yet. It's very annoying. Gemini, I basically told to talk to me like he's from South London. Worked perfectly. And so I do role playing. So I'll basically say, you describe the ICP and do role playing, try and pitch them, find out what the product, find out what messages work, etc. I use deep research basically with things like competitive intelligence, that sort of things. So yeah, I think the real power in the prompting, you can say, hey, this is my company, please research all companies like me. Or you can basically give it a long detail about, you are a top flight customer consultant, you specialize in doing competitive matrices and preparing SWOT analyses, etc., and really get it going. And I don't fully understand the magic, but it seems to work. So yeah, I use a lot of that. And role playing is actually particularly fun. Getting the AI to tell you, no, I don't want that, it's crap.
And then you've, because as you said, you have to be very detailed in your prompts. You're being very detailed into what kind of customer you want in the role play, or how do you build your effective personas that can give you that effective feedback?
Good question. So obviously, before I was this, my route into running a company was through the marketing track. So I am a strategic marketer by trade, although I happen to also have been a coder. Very useful being able to do both of those. I've been doing personas and segmentation, which is the more posh way of putting it, for some time. So I have a head start. So I will feed that in. I will basically feed in industry stuff. I'll have it do. I'll have it research industries, maybe geographically or thematically. Then I'll talk about ICPs and have it marry it together. I think in my case, a lot of the profiles that I've done have started with me, because I have spent years talking to the people who have the problems I'm solving. So most of my data. So I have a lot of notes. I feed those in. So that it's really, there's always a handcrafting thing. I would never. It is perfectly acceptable to say to an AI, give it all the premises, ideation stage, as before you've got product market fit, when you're really ideating about a problem, and give a head start. But you've then got to go and talk to real customers who don't act like it says on paper, and check what the thing said to you against what real people said. This is whether you're using AI or you're building a startup company 20 years ago. You can't start spending resources on building something until you've spoken to customers. AI will help you, maybe help you find the questions to ask, but the only data that matter comes from people who'd actually put their credit card in a slot.
Very, very, very true. And too easily forgotten, but yes, in this time and age, but it's very, very important to get back to the customer always. We have Eric asking, and I think you've touched upon that, sharing your fears with you not deploying AIs that can touch the back end, but how much do you worry about hallucinations and basically output from Gen AI that is nonsense? For example, for your agents, how do you mitigate that risk when they're interacting directly with customers?
I'll reframe the question. I know that hallucinations will happen. I do not worry about them at all, because we just won't commit code that's bad. This is why we build piece by piece, and everything is eyed by a software engineer. Every character, every ASCII character that gets added to the code base has been both debugged in AI and then checked carefully by a human. So we know we'll get hallucinations. We know we may have to have more than one run at it. So there's nothing to worry about. What you need to worry about is your method for catching them. And the main method of catching them is there is a limit to what a non-coder can do, because they won't be able to, they can't control it. Great for building half working MVPs you can show investors, not for putting in commercial use. And so you have coders that know what they're doing to look at it, and you do it with a big plan, and you do it brick by brick. You do it thematically, systematically, and very carefully. It's your process you need to worry about, not hallucinations, because it will hallucinate.
And I think that leads perfectly into Larry's final question, which is, what would your advice be to somebody with no coding experience using vibe coding? Would it be to, as you're saying, like getting an MVP and then maybe getting to a technical person who can save some working hours to get the final product? Or how would you advise somebody trying to build something but without maybe the capabilities?
I'm gonna A/B test this, because I think it depends on the circumstance. If you are, I'm going to assume, Larry, you have an idea, something you want to turn into a commercial product, a startup, possibly something that's investable. It is perfectly okay to pump out an MVP that actually shows the problem you have, then to even show that to real customers and have them experience it and tell them whether you've hit the mark with solving a product problem. And listen, there's only two problems in this world: money and time. Everything else, either you save time, gain time, save money, or make money. Everything else is just a building block to that. So if you have something that can lead to that for someone, you have something. if this is a startup, there comes a point where I don't believe a non-technical founder can go all the way alone. Although there's lots of snake oil out there in the internet saying you can, I think you could get into YC as a product designer, but at some point they'll pair you up with the technical co-founder before you ever go and raise money. So, but I will say a second part, because this may apply to some people. If you are genuinely if this is not so much because you want to start a business, but because you want to learn, then you will get much more out of, if you want to get something out of driving a car, you got to learn to drive. You want to get something out of vibing AI code, then learn some basics of coding, because then you can be in control. At the end of the day, self-education should never end. And if you want to get into vibe coding, then learn the basics of coding, efficiency of the basic structures, understanding if-thens, etc. And that will completely transform your experience with vibe coding, in my informed opinion.
Which I think can bring a lot of value to everyone. So thank you for sharing that. I do have one question for you, personal question, because you touched upon about two very important topics, I think, for any founder, which is, one is focus, as you're saying, like, for example, in terms of tools, like maybe just stick with one and see it out, especially in our world where you have so many tools popping up, so many things. It's so tempting once you hit a hurdle to kind of leave one for the other and try to experiment on the next. But you've also mentioned that sometimes you've faced failure, and then you mentioned the fact of keeping momentum is a key aspect of keeping the startup going. So when would you, from your experience, I mean, there's no perfect recipe, I am aware of that, but when is the good time to persevere and maybe the right time to pivot and actually seek out an alternative way to do things?
Oh, you really saved the hardest one for last, didn't you? Okay, there's a lot in there. On your point about AI tools, this is a Hong Kong reference. I apologize profusely to the non-Hong Kong people, but AI tools are like Taobao. Once you start, you can't stop. It's got nothing to whether it's time to pivot has got nothing to do with how you built something. It's got nothing to do with you hand coded it, AI coded it, or created a model in an Excel spreadsheet if you're doing something more enterprisey. The time to pivot comes because you talked to 50 people who you thought had the problem you had, and they said, nah. And then you go, okay, I've missed the mark. But you ask them, okay, am I close to a problem? And they go, well, this is what I have a problem with. Then you talk to the 50 again, and 35 of them go, yeah, actually, that's much closer. That makes sense. That's the pivot. The pivoting's got nothing to do with the tools you use. It's got nothing to do with AI can spit out the code or not. It is everything to do with, why are you doing what you're doing? Can you articulate a problem that someone has? And can you find, identify, and communicate to enough people that have that problem? That's the information that tells you whether you need to pivot. Then you just go back to the AI and say, okay, scrap that, spit this out instead.
Love it. Thank you so much, Phil. I think I really appreciated your ability to navigate between the actual tools and the technical world, but then bringing it back to the real world and real customers. I think that's what everybody should keep their focus on.
Oh, I might talk a good game, but I've got to go back to the real world now.
It's been tremendously really good. Learn a lot. Phil, once again, big thank you for being here. I guess I started.
My pleasure.
Everybody who's in the call, we're going to wrap up with 2 minutes to the hour. Marin, thank you for running a great Q&A. We learned a lot, and see you all.
Thank you for all the questions, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for all the questions, and we'll see you. You keep an eye on our website, and we will have our next event in June up there sometime soon. So thank you, everybody.
Okay,
thank you, Phil.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.